All right, everyone, welcome back to WTF Menopause. And this month of February, we're going to be talking about sex, relationships, and everything that surrounds that. And my husband has sort of agreed to do this. He's been a good sport with all this. But we're going to talk a little bit about what we've had to deal with, how we've kind of worked through some of those things, and in hopes that it will help you have that conversation with your partner and hopefully make sure that you find a way to enjoy this part of our lives, because it's not over yet. And this is a really huge topic, and we're not going to be able to touch on all of these topics for this month, but I definitely wanted to bring this in so that we all have that so we have the conversation, so we are able to talk to the issues and the relationship part of it, because it's a big part. So the funny thing and the ironic thing, I think, for us is that we're really horrible at communicating about this topic.
Yep.
It's like we're the worst. But I think we've come away with some ways to do that. I think we've started to work on that a little bit better. And I think that that can be helpful to people who feel like it's a really big task and really daunting to try to overcome that conversation, especially when you haven't had that conversation a lot. So a little bit of background for us is that we really never talked about it. We never really talked much about any issues or anything until, 4 or 5 years ago or so? Something like that.
I don't even think it was that long ago, but
Something like that.
sooner.
Yeah, we've been married for 20 years, and we've really not had a huge length of time, or a long length of time, where we've talked about that. You need to come closer. You're half off the screen. But when we did start talking about it, I think it was when my hormones were really going nutso, and we were talking about the fact that I really was like, every day you thought you were going to die. You felt like it was a constant.
Well, it was the fact that kind of out of the blue, you kind of ramped up and I started ramping down, and it was kind of, it's kind of continuing that trajectory, and it's it's a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. So yeah, it was definitely kind of a shocker. And part of it is too that we've been married quite a while. We've had kids, and we've had a busy household, and as the years have gone by, and those things have started to wind down as well, there's more time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have things every night of the week that drain every last reserve of energy. So that changes too.
Yeah.
And that all plays into this.
That's for sure. I agree. I think that we've had a little bit more time to focus on things, or what's there and what's not there. And you make a really good point that your hormones are just as much in play here as mine. And it's kind of what I think you mentioned last time. It's nature's cruel irony that this is what happens when we get to a certain age. But one of the things that I would tell you, when you would say, "Oh my God, please stop. I can't take it anymore." And I would say, enjoy it while you got it, because it's going to go away. Because I assumed that when I hit menopause, I would not have any desire. I would not have any interest in all of that. And I think we're starting to see some of that come into play a little bit more. Because I know we talked in the past, not too long ago, about basically nothing is happening. We have our routine. I go to bed, you go to bed, we sleep, everything happens. Nothing else happens. So when we had that kind of started to come about a year ago, I think. Is that about right?
About, yeah.
And then I think that kind of just was kind of the status quo for a bit without really saying a whole lot. We didn't really talk about it. We didn't really do anything about it. Do you think that was because you were kind of in the same place, or do you think?
I think it was because we just weren't talking about it, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were both frustrated for different reasons, and we never really talked about it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't tell you off the top of my head what was going through my head.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've slept since then. But, yeah, I mean, certainly, well, and of course, a lot of things were happening a year, 2 years ago, with me being out of town all the time too. So that kind of changed a lot of things too, because I just wasn't here. So, yeah, but I mean, in the end, it was just that we weren't talking about it. We just didn't discuss anything. So it sat unresolved for quite a while.
Yeah. And then we kind of had a moment. I think we had a bit of a blowout.
Or 3.
And I think that just, because it caused a lot of stress and a lot of strain by not having that conversation, and it just built up. And I think for both of us, and I think for some of it, for me, I think I just wasn't on my radar. It was just not as, when I was having those periods of time where I really wasn't interested, it literally was just not even part of my thinking process, about doing anything. And so a lot of the time when I was going to bed, I was just because I'm going to bed. It just was like, it's so hard to explain that it's just not even in my thought pattern at that time. But I think when it was, or when something just popped up on the computer, I don't know why. When it did come up, I think we were both just really mad at each other because we felt like the other person wasn't listening, or, well, not really listening because there wasn't really talking, but the other person wasn't being considerate or caring. And that, I think, is a huge issue for a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, it's different for everybody, right? So, we have some acquaintances that we know that have been having this issue for a very long time. And, they really didn't have any discussion. And the last discussion they had was, the exchanging of divorce papers. So, it's important to keep that communication open so that doesn't happen.
Well, it's very common this time
Absolutely
of life,
I
think, to have
Yep.
The infidelities and the divorcing and all the things that happen. And, people think it's just, people not, really all it boils down to is the communication. And I think that, we kind of keep hitting that nail on the head, but I think that is really what it boils down to, is if you're not talking to your partner about it, then you're not going to get anywhere. And if you're talking to your partner about it and you're not getting anywhere, then there's a bigger issue.
Yeah, that's a different issue. I mean, it's, communication is the easiest thing to point out. It's also the
Yeah.
most difficult thing to do.
Yeah. I think for us, it's really hard. I mean, there are times where I lay in bed when we're having a conversation and I just really feel like almost like there's a weight on my chest when I want to talk and you're asking me to talk and I don't feel like I can. Like there's a physical block. And I've had to really work hard to push past that. And I think that boils down to a couple things. One is the way I was raised and the ideas around what sex should and shouldn't be and what it means and all that stuff. And I think also my own history, my own personal history, which can have has created some of those problems. And I think it's fear of rejection is a big part of it. So for me, when I fail to communicate, you don't necessarily, I mean, you know this by now, but you don't really know those things in the moment, like what's happening in this whole mess that's right here, in my head and in my chest and on my gut. And it's takes an act of bravery really to push through that and have that conversation.
And it's a fine line between, drawing it out gently or having it explode into another argument too. So that's, from my perspective, that's always that's the line I have to walk is, how hard do I push?
Yeah.
And there are certainly nights that or days or whatever that it's not worth it. So, it just kind of depends. But again, it's all about communication of one kind or another.
So when things happen like this, obviously I'm not the only one dealing with these issues or dealing with the lack of desire or the overdrive. But when we're going through this from your side of things, like you just said, you don't want to push, you don't want to go too far, but you also want to pull it out. But are you feeling, I guess the question I want to ask is, are you feeling rejected or insecure or some of those things? Because I think when one partner is feeling like it's just not even on their radar, they're just tired, they're just whatever, they don't understand always the message that they're projecting to the partner, who is then, coming back and maybe getting angry or maybe, feeling left out or rejected.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I tend to go through a lot of things in my head, just like you do. And those things are certainly, some of the first things that cross my mind too. But, we've been together long enough that I know that I just need to sit on it for a minute. I know myself enough too that most of the time, not all the time, if I can sit on it and just think about it for a few, I can temper my reaction, I guess is the best way to put it. Doesn't work all the time. And when it doesn't work, it generally ends poorly.
Spectacularly.
Or spectacularly, yeah. But it's a continuous thing. You're never gonna have all the answers, right? So, but yeah, I mean, certainly, if your partner just rolls over and says nothing or says, not tonight, honey, absolutely those things are going to go through your head. And that's why it's important to explain what the hell's going on.
What kind of things are you talking about though? Are you just talking about?
Well, again, if your partner rolls over at night and says, not tonight, I'm tired, or, makes up some other lame excuse, and it's a lame excuse, and maybe it's not.
But, I was gonna say, wait a minute, how do you know?
But
if it's a consistent theme,
But if it's a
maybe.
consistent, well, even if it's not, um, I don't know. For me, it's like, again, how much do I want to deal with at that point? Um, how tired am I? Because Lord knows I get tired too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it kind of depends on things running up to that or leading up to that too. If it's like you said, if it's a consistent thing, then yeah, then I start thinking, well, maybe she's having an affair, or maybe she's doing this, that, or the other thing. And, I get bogged down in my head too, believe it or not. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think, I think most men do. They just don't tell you. Um, anyway, yeah.
What do you think that is?
Why do I think that is?
That men don't talk about it?
It's the way society has raised us, I guess.
Not supposed to have emotions.
Yep.
Not supposed to feel rejected, or rejection of sex is a rejection of you.
Mm, yeah,
I mean,
in some
that's
ways.
it's kind of a theme in the bigger picture, but
Yeah.
I think that's where, yeah, definitely it becomes really difficult, because I think there are a lot of people, a lot of women who feel guilty that their bodies aren't always behaving the way they want them to. And they feel bad, and that probably perpetuates the problem, because when you're feeling guilty and feeling bad, even though it's really not your fault in the sense that it's an intentional thing, it's just the way your body is behaving. There's guilt and shame involved, and I think a lot of people naturally respond with closing in and shutting down, and that then creates a bigger problem. And so I think that's where having that communication, and sometimes the communication works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's got to be a step, I think, is the first step. um, and we've shared how we kind of communicate in sometimes where um, it's a little unconventional, but it gets the ball rolling and gets the conversation started, where sometimes we'll just text, hey, we need to talk about this, or we need to talk
Oh
about.
yeah, my favorite kind of texts.
Well, I've been trying to get a little bit better about being a little more specific instead of just saying we need to talk, because that never ends well.
No. No. Don't send your husband, partner, or whatever that text and then don't follow up. That never, never goes well.
Yeah, I'm pretty famous for saying I'd like to talk about something and then
Not.
not, because I'm too chicken to get the conversation started. But I think one of the things I have started doing, mostly because you were like, I can't do this. You have to give me some context. I need to know what the hell you're talking about. Is give you a very specific, I would like to talk about
Yep.
sex, or I would like to talk about this particular aspect. And I want to do it on blah. And that helps kind of hold me accountable and gives you a heads up, so you're not freaking out that it's going to be the talk. And you have at least some more context. And sometimes we even talk a little bit more over text just to kind of start that. And then we're able to sit down and have a little bit more to go on. But, and I think it's really important to be open and honest with your partner about what's going on with your body. And I know it's embarrassing sometimes. And I know you're used to hearing all kinds of crazy stuff. That's one thing I don't have a problem communicating. But when you're not feeling it, and you have not feeling it for a long time, then you start to get into this spiral of, well, shit, now what do I do? And how do I get it? How do I get there? And how do I, and sometimes you kind of go through the motions so that your partner feels like they're getting what they need. And then you don't feel good about that either, because that doesn't really excite you.
Well, I mean, you know, that was a thought I had too when I was talking about, um, we were talking about communicating. Don't. It's important to communicate rather than give in sometimes too. I mean, there are times when there have been times in the past where it's very, very obvious that you weren't into it, but you were doing it for me. And that is as bad or worse than not engaging in any activity at all. Because that really bothers me too. So, and we've discussed that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just wanted to
Yeah,
caution
well,
against that. Don't don't give in, because it can be worse.
well, especially for people who are interested. I mean, I think most men, because this is not a show about all men suck. This is about a show. This is a show about let's work together and try to figure this out. But I think most men do want their partners to enjoy this as well, and aren't selfish. They may be displaying some of those tendencies because they are frustrated and they don't know how to express themselves in a way that might be a little bit more conducive to conversation. Um, but yeah, I agree. I think if you're not in it, they know, and well, and that makes it even harder, I think, to really keep going. But I think by talking about it, not necessarily during that point in time, but ahead of time, and just saying, this is really hard, and then talking about what might get you interested, and especially in relationships that have lasted for a while, like us. um, you know Repetition is can be a killer of a lot of things. I think having that conversation about what can you do differently, what might make it more interesting, and how can you two work together, and this is what we do, how we work together to try to make it a little bit more interesting, but also just not the same. Because for me, and actually, was it the article that I sent you? There was an article that I sent. They talked about couples that have been together for a long time, and one of the problems, and a lot of women think that it's them, um, that they're unique, or um, that they're one of the few people that have this problem, in that they're just not into it because the repetition and the sameness just literally doesn't float their boat, and it becomes it can be a marriage killer if you don't have a conversation about it. It can be, and of course this article talks about opening up relationships and that stuff, and you were a little bit concerned. But the gist of the article was that it's not unusual. In fact, it's more common for women to be bored in the bedroom in long-term relationships. And that is good to know, so that you can then work to make it less boring,
Right.
for
Right.
lack of a better word. And I think we've experienced that. I mean, for years, I think that's been one of my biggest conversations. When things fall down, it's like, I can't do the same thing over and over. It drives me crazy. For a while it works, and then it doesn't.
And that's in all aspects of your life.
I love you too. So one of the things that or one thing that, though, there is another part of this that you're really not involved in as much, and that's the stuff that I'm doing for me, so that when it comes time to, come together in the bedroom, I'm in a little bit better place, both mentally even physically, so that it's not all on just you to come up with something interesting in the bedroom. And um, and also just to help kind of prime the pump, I guess, is the best way to put it. And it's, a lot of it has to do with just getting myself in the right headspace, thinking about sex in a positive way, doing some even meditation in that general area. um, I've done some other like sensual type meditations where you just really feel like you get in tune with your body. So you feel like you're connected, because when you're not connected, you're not going to have an enjoyable experience anyway. So I think that's another key, is that for us, when we're not feeling it, when we're not in the mood, doing some of these things kind of help pull that back. And I think I've had a little bit more of a consistent higher level of wanting to be more active more recently, because I have been doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
Um, and some other things, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've been working on, and I teach in my programs that really help kind of get us into that mode. Um, and the last thing was expectations. We both have expectations, right, of what is going to be happening. And I think that's a part we need to drop. Not necessarily, well, we could very well and should do those things too. But just having that expectation, like, because there are nights and days that things just don't work.
Mm-hmm.
Things,
Sure.
mostly for me, a couple times for you, but I think that it's okay. It's frustrating, but it's okay. It's not your fault. It's not working. It's not my fault. It's not working. And I think the way you handle things, you're very compassionate, you're very considerate, you're very in tune, and and I finally, there are times I'm just like, all right, I'm calling it, I'm done. And that's okay, and have a sense of humor about it. I mean, sometimes it's frustrating, but I think more times than not, I'm just like, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves around that subject for sure,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be detrimental for absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it certainly is for me. So yeah, um, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be, it should be spontaneous. It, so yeah, if you have these huge expectations and it doesn't go to plan, so what? Roll with it.
Yeah. And I think that we have to kind of, and we had a conversation, not we, but I had a conversation with one of my guests coming up at the end of the month, and she actually talks about spontaneity, and that has to kind of go to the wayside, because sometimes we have to kind of get ourselves
Well,
in
sometimes,
this,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's a fine line again, because if you're not able to be spontaneous, you're better off scheduling
Mm-hmm.
something than doing nothing at all.
Right. And scheduling isn't a bad
And
thing.
I guess if that's what works,
And
then that's what you need to do. But
yeah.
I guess,
Well, especially if you need to kind of find your groove and get
mm-hmm.
to where you need to be.
Yep.
And I think a lot of this too, what it boils down to is getting to be really in tune and in touch with your body as a woman going through all these crazy hormonal changes, but having that ability to really like check in know what you like, know what you don't like. Some of this stuff is new because we've never had to deal with it before. Because
Hmm.
before it all worked, and now we're having to go, okay, now what? So we have to really kind of connect in, which is something that a lot of us have never had to do. And it's a new thing to deal with. But once you do that, then you're able to then move into that conversation with your partner and really kind of have that support, for both of you supporting each other through this, because it's not just you dealing with it. I mean, yes, it's your body, but you're dealing with it in connection with someone else. And I think that's super important to acknowledge that this is all it's all moving parts, but if you feel like you're working together with this, you don't feel as alone, you don't feel as isolated. I think the guilt can go away a lot more. The shame drops because now you don't feel like you have to hide it. um, I think there's a lot of really important and positive things that happen when you are able to open that line of communication, as hard as it can be. And we're certainly no poster child for communication, but we've muddled through a little bit. I think we've done better than some.
Well, certainly we're still married after 20 years, so we must be doing something right.
I hope so.
Not sure what, but
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and learned something from it, and are able to take this with back to your partner, and work toward the things that are important to you. And we'll see you next week.